Well, let's go to our next great guest. He is former Labour Party spokesman. He is Mr. James Matthewson, and I'm always delighted to have him on the show. Hello, James. How are you, sir?
I'm good, Jonathan. How are you?
I'm good. Now, James, obviously, because of being a former Labour Party spokesperson, I think clinging on by your fingernails maybe as a supporter, but I apologise if I got that wrong.
I've left the party. I'm not a member anymore. I'm not supporting the current leadership, put it that way.
Well, I'm delighted then to get your view on this, James. So we have obviously this extraordinary by-election coming up in Gaunton and Denton due to the resignation of Andrew Gwynn on health grounds. We have heard in the background for a while now that Andy Burnham wishes to return to Westminster and would actually, for many Labour MPs, it seems, on the backbenches, be a real good figurehead to actually take over from Sir Keir Starmer and give Labour a fighting chance come to the next election. But at the same time, we're now hearing extensive briefings from the Labour's National Executive Committee and indeed those close to Sir Keir Starmer that they will plan to block Andy Burnham from being allowed to even go forward to a vote of the local members. Is this just completely outrageous, or is Sir Keir Starmer right to not let what some might describe as a fox loose in the henhouse?
I mean, it's crazy to think that, Andy Burnham's some kind of insurgent politician. I mean, he's been in the Labour Party longer than Keir Starmer has. He's been a Labour MP before Keir Starmer was a member of the Labour Party. So, Andy Burnham is well known, and he has a fantastic track record. This is why Keir Starmer's team are terrified of him, because they know there are very few people. It's not for a lack of talent necessarily, but there are very few people who could kind of coalesce a movement around them strong enough to be able to challenge Keir Starmer. And the thing is, when you take over the levers of the Labour Party, because it's a very democratic party, it has lots of democratic processes. When you take over the party, what happens inevitably is you try and, stack those levers in your favour. And the National Executive Committee is one of those bodies, right? So we saw it with Jeremy Corbyn. He did the same. He stacked people on it, the trade unions that were kind of favourable to him. And Starmer's done the same. So he has kind of control of those mechanisms. And Starmer can block anybody who wants to stand as a Labour MP for selection anywhere in the country, including Andy Burnham. So I have no doubt Andy Burnham will be fully aware of this, and he won't want to shoot his shot if he thinks he's going to miss, because what would happen then is, of course, they would say, here's the application, we've got the application, we're going to leak it inevitably, and isn't it embarrassing because he's not been selected? And that would damage him in Manchester, even in his mayoralty position.
Well, what's interesting here, sorry, James, is that this seat is a sort of three-way split from what I can see in some of the opinion polls between Labour, Reform and the Green Party, all within around 5 to 6%, depending on whichever sort of pollster you use. I just think that Andy Burnham has the best chance of hoovering up enough Green voters to stem the Reform tide that is going to be hitting in and around Greater Manchester. If you want the stop Reform candidate, surely Burnham is the best choice. And a Keir Starmer appointed candidate, when the Green Party can then see that they maybe have an outside chance, or even closer than an outside chance, of actually winning it, if they don't see Burnham there, they'll think, why don't we go for it? Why don't we take votes off Labour instead to make sure that we're the ones who are seen as the stop Reform candidate? Don't you think that Burnham would actually give Labour a better chance of winning this seat?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, the only thing that could get me back in the Labour Party right now would be an Andy Burnham leadership, or possibly an Angela Rayner leadership, but I think that's more unlikely. But I do think Burnham could do that. And I think there's a reason for this. And it's not just because of his, general popularity in Manchester and the North. It's because he can communicate in ways that Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves and people like that simply cannot. Reform, and this is where I'm afraid, probably disagree, Jonathan. Reform are a populist movement, right? And the way that you counter populism is not with more populism. What you need to do is you need to come at it, and you need to be able to talk in language that people understand. And when you talk like Keir Starmer, and you've got, Donald Trump on the world stage, and you've got Keir Starmer kind of jumping around and trying to use lawyerly language and say things that he doesn't mean, nobody cares. It just doesn't measure up in the same way when you've got people as blunt as Donald Trump, as blunt as Nigel Farage. You need someone equally as blunt who can be able to deliver messaging in a way that people can easily understand. Burnham is that person for me, and I don't think there's anybody else in the Labour movement who could do it.
But what do you think about the fact that allies of Sir Keir Starmer were saying, look at the bond markets? When it was thought that Burnham could come back, he was getting them scared, especially because he says that the Labour Party is at hog to the bond markets, and maybe he would be making the same mistakes as Liz Truss, or do you not buy that?
Nah, I mean, they're saying one thing and they're doing another. The thing Liz Truss did was actually go out with outlandish policies and crazy kind of conspiracy-based changes to the way structures are done. Andy Burnham recognises problems and he can identify them, but it doesn't mean that he's going to shake them up to a degree where there's going to be, abject terror. The relationships the Labour Party's built over the past, 5-6 years with the markets, with the city, with financial industries has bothered a lot of people in the Labour Party, because you can hold these people to account. You can have healthy and productive relationships without being, kind of a slave to them and without having to kind of just slavishly follow their way of doing things economically. So it's not about him upturning everything. The man's not. I heard somebody say the other day that he's a Marxist. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. He was a Blairite. He was under Blair in the Labour Party. That's where he cut his teeth. So he's none of those things, but he is somebody who can communicate in a way that I think people will respond positively to.
But is it not fair to say, James, that Andy Burnham is definitely going to pitch on a higher spending, higher borrowing, and therefore likely to mean higher tax economy in order to meet all the things that he'll want to spend money on?
But that's the Labour way, Jonathan. That's why you're not in the Labour Party, because you don't like doing things that way. This is it. This is the difference here, right? And I've got to say, like it or lump it, I'm afraid Tories like you, or former Tories, I'm sorry, I know you've defected now.
Thank
former
you.
Tories like yourself were the ones who gave the space to Nigel Farage to be able to build this movement, this far-right insurgent politics that we see. But let me tell you, Andy Burnham is somebody who I think equally you would be scared of, as well as Keir Starmer, which is good for me and good in my books.
Well, look, I will tell you this. Number one, there's nothing wrong with being popular, James. And I think this idea, using populism as an attack line, I always find utterly bizarre. Number two, the Conservative Party absolutely have a record that they should be very embarrassed of. And people like me were sick of fighting internally for conservatism within the Conservative Party. So felt the Conservative Party had left us for too long, and we had to go and find it in the home that I think is in Reform UK for people of my political persuasion. But I will also give you this. I think Andy Burnham would be an increased threat to potential Reform UK gains in the Red Wall, a place that I live in, as you know, James, because I think that Andy Burnham, yes, has this sort of current image built around him of being this straight-talking king of the North. I do think, however, if Andy Burnham were to become leader, he'll still inherit the same economic mess. He'll still inherit a divided Labour parliamentary party. He'll still inherit, obviously, a legacy of Labour policies that have been deeply unpopular in the past 18 months. And so, whilst I think he will present Labour with a better opportunity to not have to get completely wiped out, as I think Keir Starmer's on current trajectory, I do think that there's a lot of rhetoric around Andy Burnham. I'm not quite sure on delivery. We've only got to look in Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent, where the mid-Staffordshire crisis under his watch is something that looms large over local communities like I live in.
Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? And I think one thing we can agree on, Jonathan, is that Andy Burnham would bring something that I think Reform wants to bring to the country, which is something that people have been asking for nigh on 15 years, and that's change. And change is the crucial element here. It's a change in a direction you don't want to see. It's the change in the direction I want to see. It's just a battle of which change do the British public want to see. That's what it will be. But I'll tell you now, that's far more refreshing. I would rather have the options at the ballot paper to be change in one direction or the other than status quo with kind of, soulless and directionless bureaucrats like Starmer and Reeves, at the end of the day.
Oh, look, I totally agree with you, and I think that this is why, actually, this could be a fascinating by-election, because Zach Polanski, leader of the Green Party, is from Greater Manchester. There's rumours that he may even consider putting himself forward for this seat, I think, depending on, let's be frank, on who the candidate is. If Andy Burnham is able to become the candidate, do you think this would be a good chance for Zach Polanski to show, look, I'm going to be a grown-up. I've already said publicly I'm willing to work with a Labour-led party under Andy Burnham. I'm going to say that either the Green Party will stand aside and make this the shootout between Labour and Reform.
Yeah, it's a real test of that for the Greens, because everyone's instinct is to hold on to whatever they've gained, right? That's a natural instinct among everyone. It's the same on the left as it is on the right, right? For all that we on the left love to hold the moral high ground and pretend that we're righteous about everything, those instincts still prevail a lot of the time. And letting go of that power, that's real. That's it takes a lot of substance to do that. So I'll be impressed by Zach Polanski if he can do that, and he'll be one step closer to getting my vote. Not that it matters, because I'm in Scotland Scotland, and it's a different lot of Greens here anyway, so it won't matter to him. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think that will show real character, and we could be in for having some kind of progressive alliance further down the line if he does that.
Well, it's the thing, certainly, that we saw in that Caerphilly by-election that shows that when you get a progressive movement behind, as we saw with Plaid, that it was obviously able to stop reform. People like me would obviously say, this is the problem with the progressive left and why we need to have Conservative Party voters do the right thing and get behind reform to get rid of the socialists. But hey-ho, well, I'm sure we'll duke that out, James, as and when those times come further down the line. I'm interested, James, to get your views on what was announced yesterday. 29 councils will now have their elections, I use the word cancelled. The Labour government would use delayed, postponed for another year. I would say this is a denial of democracy. There's obviously outrage from Reform UK, from the Conservatives, albeit ironically the Conservatives have councils of their own covering 1.1 million people that are also cancelling elections. Yeah. Do you think this is the wrong thing to do? Does this send the wrong message from this Labour-led government under Sir Keir Starmer that they are frit and are scared of the electors? Or do you think the argument about local government reorganisation is a fair one?
Here's a controversial take for you. I really don't think it matters at all. I mean, it does in the principle of it, because obviously people need to be able to vote. But right now, the whole dictator line and all the rest of it, I think people are just kind of rolling their eyes at it. They're not that bothered. You know, at the end of the day, local government is something that is already complex enough for people to try and understand. Half of my mates don't even know they're able to vote on May 7th when it comes to it. You know, there's that much complication when it comes to local governments. Up here in Scotland, so many people have no idea that they're sending an MSP to Holyrood. They think on the 7th of May they're going to be sending an MP to Westminster. So there's already confusion going on. I don't think it will cut through politically and damage them in the way that perhaps, you know, the opposition hope it will. But of course, in principle, we want everyone to be able to vote, and they should be able to. It's not ideal, and local government needs a right good reform to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And I say reform in the true meaning of the word there.
I know, don't worry, James. I was about to say local government does need reform. It needs Reform UK. You teaming up nicely there.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you did a good job of spotting it. That's why you used to be a spokesperson for the party. You know exactly what you're doing. Now, out of interest as well, we've seen Shabana Mahmood has now started to use a military barracks in Crowborough in East Sussex, where she's placed so far 27, what I would say illegal migrants, I appreciate, James, someone like you would say asylum seekers, into accommodation instead of in hotels. And this site can take up to a maximum of 500 people. I would argue that makes no dent to the 36,000 currently languishing in hotels who should actually be detained and deported. Obviously, James, that won't shock you. That's my worldview. I mean, how does it make you feel as someone who is, like you say, naturally a Labour person, albeit obviously you've sort of given up under Sir Keir Starmer's leadership for the time being in terms of backing the Labour Party specifically. How does it make you feel to see that this is the kind of thing that's being done under a Labour government? Shabana Mahmood, you know, talks a lot of tough rhetoric. In fact, some would say that she was auditioning for reform with some of the things that she's been saying. But our listeners are saying she's all talk, no action. Obviously, you can imagine our audience, James, is maybe not sympathetic to Labour. But like, it's surely her rhetoric is hemorrhaging votes to the left.
Exactly. That's my point. Listen, you're never going to support the Labour Party, are you, Jonathan?
No.
No, exactly. So why is she trying to get you on side? It makes no sense politically, right? You offer your values first. And if everybody just did that in politics, right, we would have a democratic system that functioned. We'd have a pluralist society where everybody can support who they want to support and they have their right to their vote and their freedom of their vote. The problem comes when you get people who are, you know, supposedly driven by one set of values, pretending to be a set of another so that they can try and get votes from another side of the political spectrum. You don't need to do that. There are enough progressive votes in Britain to curry favour and to get into government. The problem is they're scared of it because they're scared of it in places like the Red Wall. They're scared of communities that they neglected for many, many years. And they're scared of those voices that have come out there since Brexit, really, and have kind of found that process of being able to break with tribal Labour voting patterns and be able to offer their vote somewhere else. And the Labour Party never really dealt with that, never really knew how to deal with it. So now you've got people like Shabana Mahmood, who sounds like Theresa May during a hostile environment era. You know, she sounds exactly like that. And nobody in their right mind who supports the Labour Party and has, you know, traditionally would listen to that and think that's a bit of me. It makes no sense at all. So why she is doing that, why Starmer continues to go with this, you know, I mean, it was evident from the Island of Strangers rhetoric that he tried out and then within 48 hours had to roll back on because he realised that it wasn't popular. This is the problem when we have weather-vane politicians who just blow in whatever direction the headwind is the strongest. You know, I want to see people stand up to those headwinds and say, That's not what I got into politics for. Here's what I believe in. But unfortunately, when you end up with career politicians, you end up with people who see their job and the preservation of their job as far more important than actually doing the right thing. And that's why we end up with Shabana Mahmood.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because as you say, Shabana Mahmood famously, I think, went to Greece, if I remember correctly, and she was talking about the need for humanitarian aid for asylum seekers coming across the Mediterranean. She's previously called for an amnesty for all illegal migrants here, similar, by the way, to Boris Johnson, ironically. And, of course, there's also campaigns to prevent deportations of...
I've been with these people on these rallies. I spent my time in the Labour Party in my youth with these people on rallies. I was with Shabana Mahmood at pro-Palestinian rallies, right? And there's never been a more pro-Israeli figure in the Labour Party than she is now. It is bizarre, the transformation, and it is studied and it should be studied, but that transformation that takes place when politicians, especially those that come from supposedly working class and Labour movements, once they get into power, the transformation that happens for them to become all of a sudden, bureaucratic and faceless figures. When I knew these people, I knew many cabinet members who were current cabinet members, who were people of principle, who were on campaigns regularly, all the rest of it. When they get these jobs and they get in these positions, they transform overnight. It's absolutely terrifying to witness.
What you say there, James, is what I hear from Labour councillors across the country that I've got to know over a number of years, who, like you, have been on marches, been on rallies, been in groups supporting the very causes that you would stand up for, and they are absolutely astonished to see these people now saying something very different. The fact is that Shabana Mahmood has sounded more right-wing and conservative, to be quite frank, than many Conservative Home Secretaries and Home Office Ministers that I can think of since the Cameron 2010 era. I mean, it's extraordinary that I've, like you say, find myself sitting there going, this is all great, but like you say, do I believe it'll happen? No. And does it make me want to vote Labour anymore? No. And I just think that until, like you say, John Curtis says it's what some polls say 8 to 10% of the Labour votes gone to reform, but it's about 20% is hemorrhaging towards Lib Dems and the Greens, and of course another 20% I think currently thinking about sitting at home entirely. And those are the people that will be motivated, like you would say, James, by the causes and passion and values that you drive.
Exactly. And most people, by the way, right, people have their general values and their outlines, right, but people are busy. Not everybody who is politically engaged and, looking at all these different stories that we kind of machinate over every day. But at the end of the day, what people want to see is conviction and self-belief. You're only going to believe in you're only going to give your vote to a politician who believes in themselves. And right now, when you hear Shabana Mahmood, you look in their eyes and you can see their mouth moving. You hear what comes out, and you can associate that with Conservative politics. But you look in their eyes and you know that they don't believe what they're saying. And if they don't believe what they're saying, how can the British public at the end of the day? James
Matthewson, thank you so much for joining us there, former Labour Party spokesperson. Really great to get your views and opinions on the big stories of the day.